The winter of 1888 arrived upon the English countryside with a quiet majesty that disguised countless private sorrows beneath its silver frost. Across rolling hills, where ancient oaks stretched skeletal branches toward pale skies and smoke curled lazily from village chimneys, the great houses of the aristocracy prepared for another glittering social season. Behind polished marble halls, sparkling chandeliers, and orchestras rehearsing graceful waltzes, fortunes were negotiated as carefully as hearts were ignored. A young woman's smile could become a family's salvation. A gentleman's proposal could rescue generations from disgrace. Society celebrated romance with extravagant elegance while treating marriage as little more than another transaction between proud names engraved upon old stone walls. Ashcombe Hall stood proudly atop a gentle rise overlooking frozen gardens where sleeping roses waited patiently for spring. Once admired as one of the county's grandest estates, its honey-colored walls still reflected candlelight with quiet dignity, yet beneath its magnificent appearance lingered a desperate truth known only to creditors and whispered servants. Earl Reginald Ashcombe had inherited noble blood but mounting debts, and every passing season tightened invisible chains around the family's future. Tonight's winter reception was not merely another fashionable gathering. It was a final opportunity to restore fading prestige before ruin became impossible to conceal. Guests arrived beneath glowing lanterns, their elegant carriages rolling across frost-covered gravel with rhythmic precision. Ladies descended wrapped in velvet cloaks trimmed with white fur, while gentlemen adjusted polished gloves before entering the brightly illuminated manor. Crystal glasses shimmered beneath towering chandeliers. String musicians filled the ballroom with melodies that drifted like soft snowfall through richly decorated corridors. Perfumed roses adorned every marble column despite the harsh December cold, offering an illusion that beauty alone could suspend time. Yet beneath every courteous greeting rested careful calculation. Families measured fortunes behind pleasant smiles. Mothers evaluated suitable husbands with practiced discretion. Daughters perfected graceful laughter that concealed nervous anticipation. The Earl welcomed each distinguished visitor with impeccable manners despite exhaustion hidden behind measured expressions. His eldest daughter, Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, stood proudly beside him wearing emerald silk embroidered with tiny golden leaves that sparkled beneath candlelight. She possessed striking beauty sharpened by confidence and had mastered every accomplishment expected of refined society. Beside her waited Lady Vivian, equally elegant in sapphire satin, whose effortless wit charmed nearly everyone fortunate enough to share conversation. Together they represented everything London admired: refinement, education, fashionable grace, and flawless presentation. They had rehearsed every gesture for this evening because both understood precisely what depended upon its success. Only one absence stirred quiet speculation. The youngest daughter had not arrived. Servants exchanged uncertain glances whenever the Earl discreetly inquired whether Miss Eleanor had returned. Each time they answered with respectful apologies, concern settled more heavily upon his shoulders. Beatrice whispered impatiently that her younger sister possessed dreadful timing. Vivian sighed that Eleanor always preferred forgotten villages over proper invitations. Their words carried frustration rather than cruelty, yet neither sister truly understood why Eleanor repeatedly wandered beyond comfortable estates to visit struggling tenants, widowed mothers, and abandoned schools scattered across the countryside. Compassion, they believed, could never repair a family collapsing beneath impossible debt. Conversation halted unexpectedly as the grand doors opened once more. Every eye turned toward the entrance. Lord Adrian Ravenshire stepped quietly inside. For years his name had circulated through drawing rooms like an impossible legend. Owner of vast estates stretching across several counties, educated throughout Europe, respected for uncommon intelligence, and astonishingly wealthy despite remarkable youth, he had declined every celebrated debutante presented before him. Countless noble families dreamed of securing his affection, while gossip endlessly questioned why such an accomplished gentleman remained unmarried. His arrival tonight transformed polite excitement into breathless anticipation. Tall, composed, and dressed in an impeccably tailored black evening coat, Adrian carried himself without arrogance. His calm blue eyes observed the ballroom with thoughtful restraint rather than hungry admiration. The Earl welcomed him warmly, masking astonishment behind flawless etiquette. After exchanging formal greetings, Adrian accepted neither lengthy compliments nor flattering introductions. Instead, his steady gaze rested briefly upon the Ashcombe daughters before returning to their father. "I understand," he said with remarkable composure, "that every father knows his children better than the world ever shall." The musicians faltered almost imperceptibly. Silence gathered. Adrian continued in the same measured voice. If you believe one daughter worthy of sharing my life, my lord, choose whichever you wish. I shall honor your judgment and marry her. No one breathed. Crystal glasses remained suspended halfway toward astonished lips. The Earl stared as though uncertain he had heard correctly. Then whispers erupted across the ballroom like sparks racing through dry autumn leaves. Mothers exchanged triumphant glances. Gentlemen struggled to conceal disbelief. Beatrice straightened proudly, convinced destiny had finally rewarded years of careful preparation. Vivian lowered her eyes with practiced modesty while secretly imagining wedding bells echoing through ancient cathedrals. The Earl opened his mouth to answer. Before a single word emerged, the great entrance doors swung open again beneath a rush of icy wind. A young woman stepped hesitantly across the threshold. Her dove-gray traveling cloak dripped with rain. Damp curls escaped a hastily tied ribbon. Mud stained the hem of her plain dress, while chilled hands clutched a worn leather satchel instead of embroidered gloves. She looked nothing like the jeweled ladies filling the ballroom. She looked like someone who had crossed storms to keep a promise. Miss Eleanor Ashcombe stopped only after noticing every face staring toward her. Laughter flickered among several fashionable guests. Her sisters froze with embarrassment. The Earl lowered his eyes in quiet despair. Yet Lord Adrian Ravenshire did not appear amused. He simply looked at the rain-soaked youngest daughter with calm curiosity, as though the entire glittering ballroom had suddenly faded into silence around her. Then, before anyone recovered from the unexpected interruption, he took one deliberate step forward and softly said, "Miss Ashcombe, would you grant me the first conversation instead of the first dance?" The ballroom remained suspended in stunned silence after Lord Adrian Ravenshire's unexpected request, as though even the chandeliers hesitated to scatter their golden light across the polished floor. Eleanor stood motionless, rainwater glistening upon the edge of her weathered cloak, unable to understand why Britain's most sought-after nobleman had addressed her rather than the dazzling ladies surrounding him. Every instinct urged her to decline, disappear upstairs, and spare her family another moment of humiliation. Yet Adrian's expression contained neither mockery nor pity. His calm eyes held only quiet sincerity, leaving her with no graceful excuse to refuse. "If it pleases you, my lord," she answered softly, offering the respectful curtsy expected of a lady despite the mud staining her skirts. The Earl forced an uneasy smile, relieved that decorum had survived the awkward interruption. Beatrice and Vivian watched in frozen disbelief while whispers spread through the gathering with astonishing speed. Some guests insisted Adrian merely wished to spare the embarrassed youngest daughter further ridicule. Others believed the conversation concealed a clever test of character. Every explanation seemed improbable, yet curiosity soon overwhelmed judgment. Adrian guided Eleanor toward the long conservatory adjoining the ballroom, where towering glass windows overlooked frost-covered gardens shimmering beneath moonlight. The distant orchestra resumed its waltz, though the music now sounded softened by walls of crystal and climbing ivy. Fragrant camellias bloomed despite winter's severity, filling the air with delicate perfume that mingled gently with the scent of damp earth carried upon Eleanor's cloak. "I fear I have arrived in disgrace," Eleanor admitted with an embarrassed smile. "You must forgive my appearance." "I have seen many magnificent gowns this evening," Adrian replied. "None tells me where its wearer has been." She glanced down at the mud upon her hem. "I spent the afternoon beside the river." "So I imagined." The floods damaged several cottages. An elderly widow refused to abandon her home because her late husband's books remained inside. "We managed to save both." Adrian regarded her quietly. "You delayed attending your own family's most important evening for books belonging to someone else." They were all she had left of happiness. Her answer arrived so naturally that she seemed unaware its simplicity carried remarkable weight. Adrian recognized no trace of performance within her voice. Unlike countless fashionable conversations he had endured throughout London's drawing rooms, Eleanor spoke without calculation. She neither sought admiration nor concealed inconvenient truths beneath polished phrases. "You value unusual treasures, Miss Ashcombe. I believe memories deserve shelter as much as people." A faint smile touched his lips. "That is a rare conviction." Outside, snowflakes began drifting gently across the moonlit gardens, transforming frozen hedges into silver sculptures. Eleanor watched them quietly before turning back toward the ballroom beyond the glass. Through sparkling windows she glimpsed her sisters surrounded by distinguished gentlemen, radiant beneath glittering chandeliers. For a fleeting moment sorrow crossed her face. "They belong there," she whispered. "And you?" "I belong wherever I happen to be needed." Adrian considered those words carefully. Most ladies introduced themselves through accomplishments carefully rehearsed since childhood. Eleanor introduced herself without intending to, revealing a soul measured not by accomplishments but by quiet service. He had spent years searching among Europe's grandest houses for authenticity, only to discover it unexpectedly wearing rain-soaked boots inside an English conservatory. Meanwhile, gossip multiplied faster than dancing couples crossing the ballroom. Mothers exchanged alarmed glances as daughters invented reasons to wander near the conservatory doors. Servants carrying silver trays became accidental messengers, repeating fragments of overheard conversation from corridor to corridor. By the time dessert appeared, speculation had transformed into confident rumor. Several guests already believed Lord Adrian intended to announce an engagement before midnight. Beatrice struggled to preserve her gracious smile despite growing humiliation. Vivian attempted to dismiss the whispers with elegant laughter, yet uncertainty crept behind every polished gesture. Neither sister resented Eleanor's kindness, but both quietly wondered whether goodness possessed hidden charms they had spent years overlooking. When Adrian and Eleanor finally returned, conversations faltered once again. Without ceremony, Adrian addressed the Earl. "My lord, before making any decision concerning marriage, I request permission to remain several days as your guest." The Earl accepted immediately, though confusion lingered within every grateful word. "I should be honored, Lord Ravenshire." Adrian inclined his head. "There is still much I wish to understand." No further explanation followed. The evening gradually resumed its carefully choreographed elegance, yet every smile now concealed fresh uncertainty. Eleanor avoided unnecessary attention by assisting elderly guests and comforting anxious servants overwhelmed by unexpected demands. Adrian observed each quiet kindness without interruption. He noticed how she thanked exhausted footmen by name, how frightened children instinctively approached her despite crowded rooms, and how she listened with complete attention whenever another person spoke. None of these gestures appeared practiced. They belonged naturally to someone who had long forgotten the difference between nobility and ordinary humanity. Later, while departing guests collected cloaks beneath glittering entrance lamps, Adrian stepped outside alone. Snow settled silently upon waiting carriages, muffling the restless world beneath soft whiteness. From his pocket he withdrew a small silver compass worn smooth by years of careful handling. Its engraved surface reflected pale moonlight before disappearing again beneath his gloved hand. Behind him came quiet footsteps. Eleanor had ventured outdoors carrying blankets for shivering stable boys. "You should not remain in the cold," she said gently. "Nor should you. They have been standing here for hours." Without another word she wrapped warm wool around the youngest servant before returning toward the house. Unaware, Adrian still watched her. He opened the compass briefly, tracing faded letters carved inside by his late mother many years earlier. "Only those who lose themselves discover the way home." He closed it slowly, his decision growing clearer than ever before. Inside Ashcombe Hall, however, another heart had already surrendered to jealousy. From an upstairs window, Beatrice witnessed Adrian watching Eleanor disappear through falling snow. For the first time in her carefully ordered life, she feared beauty, education, and flawless manners might never equal the quiet power of a compassionate soul. And somewhere within the shadows of the corridor, unseen by every guest, an unknown listener smiled as though Eleanor's unexpected rise had awakened a dangerous opportunity that promised to change every destiny beneath Ashcombe Hall's ancient roof forever. Morning arrived beneath a veil of pearl-gray clouds, casting gentle light across Ashcombe Hall as though the ancient estate wished to conceal the restless emotions awakened during the previous evening. Frost sparkled upon trimmed hedges, while delicate ribbons of mist drifted above frozen ponds where silent swans glided like living sculptures. Inside the manor, servants hurried through polished corridors preparing breakfast, yet conversation never strayed far from Lord Adrian Ravenshire and the astonishing attention he had shown the youngest Ashcombe daughter. Rumor had already settled into certainty. Before the day had properly begun, society had quietly decided that something extraordinary was unfolding beneath the Earl's roof. Eleanor rose earlier than anyone expected. She preferred mornings untouched by ceremony, when birdsong replaced polite conversation and honesty seemed easier beneath an open sky than beneath crystal chandeliers. Wrapping herself in a simple wool cloak, she carried a basket of bread toward the village bordering the Ashcombe estate. Several elderly tenants depended upon those early visits, though she had never spoken of them during fashionable gatherings. To Eleanor, kindness lost its meaning the moment it sought applause. She had scarcely crossed the front gates before another pair of footsteps joined the quiet rhythm of her own. Lord Adrian walked beside her without attendants, dressed not in formal aristocratic splendor but in a plain dark coat suitable for country roads. His polished boots already carried traces of frozen earth. "I hope I am not intruding," he said. "You are surprising me. I have discovered that surprises often reveal the truest versions of people." She smiled faintly. "Then today may disappoint you. I intend only to deliver bread. Perhaps intentions matter more than grandeur." Together they continued toward the village as pale sunlight slowly dissolved the lingering mist. Along the roadside, bare branches formed graceful arches overhead, their delicate silhouettes etched against the brightening heavens. The landscape seemed suspended between winter's hardship and spring's distant promise, mirroring the uncertainty growing quietly between them. Their first stop was a modest stone cottage where an elderly schoolmaster lived alone after losing both his wife and eyesight. Eleanor entered without hesitation, arranging fresh bread upon the table before reading aloud from a well-worn volume of poetry because she knew the old gentleman missed books more deeply than conversation. Adrian remained respectfully silent, observing how her gentle voice transformed a lonely room into one filled with warmth. When they departed, the grateful schoolmaster never once thanked a wealthy nobleman. Instead, he reached for Eleanor's hand with unmistakable affection. Outside, Adrian asked softly, "How long have you visited him?" "Nearly 4 years. And no one at the manor knows?" They never asked. There was no resentment within her answer, only simple acceptance. Throughout the morning they traveled from cottage to cottage. Eleanor mended torn blankets with widows, distributed medicine purchased from her modest allowance, and listened patiently to anxious farmers burdened by failed harvests. Adrian noticed that she remembered every name, every sorrow, and every promise she had ever made. She carried no ledger recording generosity because compassion had become as natural to her as breathing. At midday they rested beside a narrow stream where thin sheets of ice floated lazily upon dark water. Eleanor removed a folded parcel from her basket containing nothing more extravagant than bread, apples, and cheese. "I fear Ashcombe Hall offers finer meals," she said apologetically. "I have attended banquets where every course tasted of ambition." She laughed quietly. "That is an unusual description. An accurate one." For a peaceful moment neither spoke. The only sounds were distant crows circling leafless trees and water slipping gently beneath broken ice. Adrian found himself strangely grateful for silence unburdened by expectation. At last Eleanor asked the question she had carefully avoided. "My lord, may I inquire why you made such an extraordinary declaration before my father?" He gazed toward the stream before answering. "Because I wish to observe truth. I do not understand. Titles introduce people long before character has the opportunity." She listened attentively. "Every household becomes different when offered enormous fortune. Courtesy changes. Ambition awakens. Masks become difficult to maintain. You wish to test us. I wish to discover whether anyone remained unchanged." Her thoughtful expression revealed neither offense nor approval. "And did you?" "Yes." His answer lingered between them like winter sunlight touching frozen ground. She lowered her eyes. "I hope you were not disappointed." "I was astonished." A faint blush colored her cheeks before she quickly changed the subject, uncomfortable beneath such sincere admiration. Meanwhile, events within Ashcombe Hall unfolded far less peacefully. Beatrice and Vivian found themselves surrounded by visitors eager to extract every possible detail concerning Adrian's intentions. The sisters answered with graceful composure, though uncertainty slowly eroded confidence carefully cultivated throughout years of aristocratic training. Even the Earl sensed that control over his family's destiny was slipping beyond his reach. By evening London's newspapers had already begun printing sensational headlines. "Britain's wealthiest bachelor delays his choice. Society demands an answer." Speculation traveled faster than winter winds, reaching drawing rooms, gentlemen's clubs, and fashionable salons before sunset. Some praised Adrian's unusual integrity. Others condemned his silence as cruel entertainment. The Ashcombe daughters suddenly became the nation's favorite subject of gossip. That night a grand charity banquet welcomed distinguished guests from neighboring estates. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors while musicians performed elegant Strauss waltzes. Every eye followed Adrian from the moment he entered the ballroom. Ladies waited expectantly. Mothers whispered hopeful encouragement. The orchestra began another graceful dance. Adrian crossed the crowded room without hesitation. Beatrice straightened proudly. Vivian smiled serenely. Instead, he stopped before Eleanor, who stood quietly near a window arranging flowers forgotten by distracted servants. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, extending his hand with calm confidence, "would you honor me?" The ballroom seemed to exhale all at once. She accepted almost reluctantly. As they moved together beneath glittering chandeliers, whispers multiplied into open scandal. Elegant fans concealed astonished expressions. Distinguished gentlemen exchanged bewildered glances. Mothers silently abandoned cherished expectations. Yet Adrian noticed none of them. His attention never wandered beyond the woman dancing beside him with hesitant grace. When the music ended, he placed something small within Eleanor's gloved palm before bowing respectfully. Only later, standing alone beneath moonlit windows, did she unfold her fingers and discover an antique silver compass engraved with delicate words. Only those who lose themselves discover the way home. Before she could comprehend its meaning, a cold, commanding voice echoed behind her. "How touching," declared the formidable Duchess Blackthorn. "Tell me, Miss Ashcombe, exactly how does one village charity purchase the affection of England's richest nobleman?" The next morning dawned beneath a pale silver sky, but the warmth of sunrise never reached Eleanor's heart. The Duchess Blackthorn's accusation had spread through the ballroom faster than music, and by breakfast every guest at Ashcombe Hall had heard a different version of the same cruel tale. Some claimed Eleanor had deliberately enchanted Lord Adrian with carefully staged acts of charity. Others insisted she had spent years waiting for a wealthy bachelor to rescue her family from disgrace. None of them had walked beside her through flooded villages or watched her kneel beside frightened children. Society preferred elegant lies over inconvenient truths. Eleanor descended the grand staircase with quiet composure, refusing to allow humiliation to bend her dignity. Every conversation softened when she entered the dining room, only to resume in hushed whispers once she passed. Her sisters avoided her eyes. Beatrice struggled against wounded pride, while Vivian seemed torn between affection and confusion. Their father looked older than he had only days before, burdened by debts, expectations, and a scandal he could neither control nor silence. Lord Adrian arrived moments later, greeting everyone with effortless courtesy. His calm demeanor betrayed no irritation, yet Eleanor noticed a subtle firmness in his expression. He had heard the rumors. She feared he had begun regretting the attention he had shown her. Breakfast ended with polite formalities before Adrian quietly approached Eleanor. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. She hesitated only briefly before accepting. They wandered beyond the formal gardens toward an abandoned corner of the estate where nature had reclaimed an old botanical sanctuary. Ivy climbed weathered stone walls. Broken fountains rested beneath blankets of moss. Empty flower beds waited patiently beneath winter soil, as though they still believed spring would eventually remember them. "It is beautiful," Eleanor whispered. It was forgotten. She brushed her gloved fingertips across the cracked edge of an ancient marble bench. "So are many beautiful things." Adrian watched her carefully. "Most visitors see only neglect. I see what it once was. And what it could become?" She nodded. "Everything living deserves another season." Without another word she knelt beside a withered rose bush, gently removing dead branches while exposing tiny green shoots hidden beneath frost. Adrian found himself smiling. Even here, surrounded by decay, Eleanor instinctively searched for life instead of loss. Over the following days they returned repeatedly to the forgotten garden. Elderly gardeners, surprised by the unexpected visitors, slowly joined their efforts. Eleanor planned new beds of lavender, climbing roses, foxgloves, and white lilies. Adrian carried stones, repaired broken paths, and worked beside laborers without concern for appearances. The neglected sanctuary gradually awakened beneath patient hands. As the garden changed, so did their conversations. Gone were cautious exchanges shaped by etiquette. Instead they spoke honestly. Eleanor confessed that she had never dreamed of marrying into extraordinary wealth. "I have watched fortunes disappear overnight," she admitted one afternoon while planting winter jasmine. "Money builds walls, but it cannot promise peace." "What do you desire instead?" Adrian asked. "A home where kindness is never considered weakness." He stood quietly for several moments before answering. "My parents possessed every privilege England could offer." She looked toward him. "They married because powerful families arranged it." His voice remained steady, though sadness lingered beneath every word. "They admired each other's titles more than each other's hearts. Our house became magnificent to strangers and unbearable to those living inside it." Eleanor listened without interruption. "When they died," Adrian continued softly, "I inherited their estates, but I also inherited their mistake. He gazed across the neglected garden. I swore I would never allow another marriage to begin as a negotiation. Understanding slowly dawned across Eleanor's face. That is why you spoke to my father. Yes. You never intended to let him choose for you. I intended to watch everyone after making the offer. She lowered her eyes. You were searching for honesty. I was searching for someone who remained the same whether fortune approached or disappeared. Silence settled comfortably between them. Finally Adrian smiled. Only one daughter continued visiting villages while everyone else discussed wedding plans. Eleanor laughed quietly. I simply forgot people were watching. I noticed because you forgot. The words lingered long after they were spoken. As twilight painted the winter sky with soft shades of violet and gold, Adrian removed the silver compass from his pocket. It belonged to my mother. Eleanor accepted it carefully. It guided her during difficult journeys. She traced the faded engraving. Only those who lose themselves discover the way home. My mother believed home was never a place. She looked toward him. It was a person. For the first time neither spoke. The silence itself became a confession neither possessed courage to complete. Days later invitations arrived announcing a magnificent diplomatic reception hosted by influential members of Parliament. The gathering celebrated growing alliances between Britain and several European kingdoms. Ashcombe Hall buzzed with renewed excitement as servants prepared gowns and polished silver. Eleanor attended only because her father insisted. The ballroom glittered with greater splendor than before. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead while military officers, ambassadors, duchesses and princes filled every elegant corner. Yet beneath polished smiles flowed a dangerous current of political ambition. Halfway through the evening Eleanor wandered into a quiet gallery seeking relief from crowded conversation. Her eyes fell upon a display of official correspondence resting inside a glass cabinet prepared for distinguished guests. One sealed document bore Lord Adrian Ravenshire's name. Another displayed the royal crest of a European kingdom. Before she could step away, two diplomats entered the gallery unaware of her presence. The engagement should be announced soon, one gentleman remarked. The princess's family expects confirmation before Parliament reconvenes. It will strengthen every political alliance. Eleanor felt the world shift beneath her feet. She retreated silently before either man noticed her. Every conversation, every shared morning, every hopeful glance. Had she misunderstood everything? Hours later Adrian searched the ballroom for Eleanor, intending at last to speak words he had hidden behind restraint for weeks. Instead he found only the silver compass resting alone upon the marble ledge beside the forgotten garden's entrance. Inside it lay a single folded note. Some people deserve freedom more than affection. If your future belongs elsewhere, I pray you find every happiness. Thank you for reminding me that goodness still exists. Adrian's face lost every trace of composure. For the first time since arriving at Ashcombe Hall, fear entered his heart, because he realized Eleanor had walked away believing she was the obstacle standing between him and the life the entire kingdom expected him to choose. Rain swept across the countryside with relentless determination as Lord Adrian Ravenshire mounted his horse before dawn, Eleanor's farewell note clenched tightly within his gloved hand. Every mile between Ashcombe Hall and the Northern Railway line seemed to stretch farther than the last, as though fate itself wished to test the strength of a love neither of them had dared to name. He had spent years believing wisdom required patience, restraint and careful observation. Now he understood that silence could wound more deeply than any spoken cruelty. If Eleanor boarded the morning train believing his future belonged to another woman, he might lose the only person who had ever seen the man beneath the title. Eleanor sat quietly inside the waiting carriage that would carry her to the station, watching familiar fields disappear behind a veil of rain. She had accepted the position overseeing charitable schools in Scotland with calm gratitude, convincing herself that distance was the kindest gift she could offer Adrian. His duty, she believed, reached far beyond personal happiness. If political alliances demanded a royal marriage, she would never become the reason he abandoned them. Loving someone, she had discovered, sometimes meant walking away before they were forced to choose. Ashcombe Hall faded into the mist as the carriage rolled onward. Inside the manor, the Earl stood silently beside the library window, holding the letter Eleanor had left for him. She thanked him for every sacrifice he had made despite his failures and asked him never to blame himself for the path she had chosen. Tears gathered unnoticed in the old nobleman's eyes. For the first time, he recognized that the quiet daughter he had too often overlooked possessed a courage greater than all the honors his family had inherited. Meanwhile, Adrian reached London just as Parliament's private reception concluded. Without ceremony, he strode directly toward the ministers responsible for arranging the supposed royal engagement. The room fell silent at his unexpected arrival. "I require an explanation," Adrian said evenly. An elderly statesman answered with measured confidence. "There is nothing to explain. Such a marriage would strengthen the nation. It would strengthen your influence." Several distinguished gentlemen exchanged uneasy glances. "You never accepted the proposal," Adrian continued. "You merely announced it before I had spoken." One minister attempted a diplomatic smile. "The newspapers assumed your cooperation. You encouraged that assumption." No one denied it. Adrian's voice remained calm, yet every word carried unmistakable authority. "My estates belong to me. My future belongs to me. Most importantly, my heart has never belonged to your negotiations." Without waiting for permission, he removed the unsigned agreement from the polished table before every assembled official. Then he tore it cleanly in half. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. "I will not build peace upon dishonesty." Leaving the stunned ministers behind, Adrian hurried back into the storm. At the railway station, crowds gathered beneath iron canopies as steam drifted through the cold morning air. Conductors hurried along crowded platforms while whistles echoed across rows of waiting locomotives. Travelers embraced hurriedly before departures, their conversations swallowed by rain and smoke. Eleanor stood alone beside her modest luggage, her gloved hands clasped tightly around the silver compass she had intended to leave behind but could not. She opened it once more, reading the familiar inscription through blurred vision. "Only those who lose themselves discover the way home." A sudden commotion rippled across the platform. Passengers turned. A horse stopped abruptly near the station entrance. Moments later Adrian appeared, breathless from the journey, his dark coat soaked by rain. "Eleanor." She froze. For several heartbeats neither moved. The noise of the station seemed strangely distant. "You should not have come," she whispered. "I should have come sooner." She lowered her eyes. "They told me about the princess. There is no engagement. The diplomats spoke of plans that belong to everyone except me." She struggled to steady her breathing. "You have responsibilities." "I do." "Then why risk them?" Adrian stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. "Because I have finally discovered which responsibility matters most." Travelers slowed their hurried steps, sensing something extraordinary unfolding before them. Adrian spoke clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I spent years searching for the perfect lady." His eyes never left Eleanor's. "I visited palaces, attended magnificent banquets, and listened to countless polished conversations." A gentle smile touched his face. "I found elegance everywhere." He paused. "But goodness only once." The platform grew utterly silent. "I believe titles define nobility." He shook his head. "You taught me that compassion defines it far better." Eleanor felt tears gathering despite every effort to remain composed. "You cannot say these things before everyone." "I intend to say them before the entire kingdom if necessary." A murmur swept through the watching crowd. "My fortune purchased estates," Adrian continued, "but it never purchased peace. You walked into my life wearing a rain-soaked cloak instead of jewels, carrying hope instead of ambition. Every day since then has shown me the kind of woman I once believed existed only in stories." He reached into his pocket and produced a simple gold ring. "I asked your father to choose a daughter because I believed wisdom could be borrowed." His voice softened. "Instead, destiny quietly introduced the only woman who never wished to be chosen." Eleanor covered her mouth as emotion overwhelmed every carefully guarded defense. "I have nothing worthy of your name," she whispered. "You have everything worthy of my life." She looked toward the gathering crowd. Society had judged her, ridiculed her, questioned her motives. Now strangers watched in complete silence, waiting for her answer. Slowly she extended the silver compass toward Adrian. "I believe this belongs to your family." He gently closed her fingers around it. "No." His smile carried quiet certainty. "It belongs to the woman who finally brought me home." Tears escaped freely down Eleanor's cheeks. Without another word she stepped forward. Their hands met. No applause erupted immediately. Instead, an almost sacred silence settled across the platform as every witness recognized they were seeing something rarer than wealth, influence, or political triumph. They were witnessing two hearts choosing truth over expectation. Weeks later, Ravenshire Manor opened its gates for a wedding unlike any society had imagined. Instead of filling the front pews with princes and ambitious aristocrats alone, Adrian reserved places of honor for village teachers, widows, gardeners, servants, orphan children, and elderly laborers whose lives Eleanor had quietly transformed. Noble guests sat beside common families without distinction. The bride wore an elegant ivory gown embroidered by village women with tiny wildflowers gathered from the restored garden where hope had first taken root. During the ceremony, Adrian spoke one final vow that lingered in every heart long after the bells had fallen silent. "The world remembers the lady who arrived late," he said, smiling at Eleanor. "I shall forever remember the woman who arrived exactly when my soul needed her." Years afterward, people scarcely recalled the scandal, the gossip, or the glittering ballroom where the story began. They remembered instead the rain-soaked young woman who chose kindness over applause, and the wealthy nobleman wise enough to recognize that the greatest fortune in England had never been hidden inside a treasury, but within the steadfast heart of the youngest daughter who never asked to be chosen.